Oh, well, welcome back to Around the Museum with Joe and Diane, where we're sticking with the bones of the issue and delving into limb bones this time, I believe. We sort of spent last time looking at the skull and the spine and all it fits together, a little bit about the ribs, but we're going to go on to limb bones and perhaps onto some of the joints and stuff as well. So we'll delve into that just now. But just to remind us, Diane, if people are enjoying this series, obviously come and visit the museum. We've got museums all over the world, but how can they keep in touch and up to date with creation research?
Well, you can go to our main website, which is easy to remember, creationresearch.net. Plus, we have a wonderful YouTube channel where there are videos of some of the things we've done here, some of the videos that we've made for creation research, and that's ongoing 24 hours a day.
Absolutely. So join us there and follow us there. All right, Dan, let's go on to limb bones. We've got a few limbs and stuff lying around here. So
yes,
over to you. Dive into what are some of these here that we're looking at?
And this is an upper arm bone, otherwise known as a humerus. This is another one here.
So that's this bit.
That's this bit here. Yes, indeed. So this is the ball of the ball and socket joint, whereas down here we have the elbow. That's the back of it there. This is the front of it here. And it's more like a hinge joint. Now, it's interesting that they use those engineering terms because that's what they do work like, but they're actually much more subtle than that. They're more than just those simple engineering terms.
So where would this ball, this is obviously up in our shoulder, right? So what's the bone that this would connect into then, this ball and socket joint? Would it have anything to do with this?
Yes,
here?
it would. Yes, this is the scapula, or otherwise known as the shoulder blade. Now that's the back of it, so that's the ridge that you can actually feel on someone's back.
Yeah, that's this bit round here.
Around there, that's right. This blade part is completely covered with muscle, so you can't really feel that. And this is actually the socket of the ball and socket joint. Now that doesn't look particularly efficient. The ball is a lot bigger than the socket. Now these obviously are not from the same individuals. So
why don't we pull Ezekiel around here?
A bit of
Of course, we've called him
here.
Ezekiel after the dry bones.
Yes,
in
that's
the book
right.
Ezekiel,
He's made out of dry bones. So it's quite appropriate.
Anyway, perhaps we should talk. So here's your shoulder blade right here, the
yes,
scapula.
that's right.
And there's the joint where it goes in
There is the joint there. So here's the ball, here is the socket. Now the socket is quite shallow, so this is all held together by a lot of very strong ligaments and muscles. But the reason it's like this is that it gives you plenty of scope for movement. Right. But we have the same sort of joint down here with the hip bone and the femur, right? But this time you've got a much deeper socket. So you can have the same basic design, but manipulated or according to the need. Up here, this is important for orientating your whole arm because human arms are designed to manipulate objects, to reach out to things around us, whereas the human leg is designed for weight bearing. So this is much stronger and more tightly fitting.
So it's going to kind of be holding you up into position, fitting you in nicely. So,
yes, that's right.
Now, obviously, this can become dislocated. It can pop out, and most of the time just needs popping back in again, and it sorts itself out from there. But so, would that be an argument of a bad design? The fact that it could come out?
It has been used as evidence for bad design, but think of the sorts of things that has to happen for you to have it dislocate.
Yeah. I mean, if it's popping out all the time, you've probably got something wrong with your bone structure and skeletal.
That's a problem. That's usually caused by a weakness in the muscles and ligaments or a defect in the bones. That's another reminder that the world is actually going downhill. And so that's a degeneration.
Yeah, but of course, if we did have something, if this was perhaps a stronger, so it didn't dislocate it, maybe if it was like a hinge, right, like our knees are sort of a hinge kind of, or elbow, that'd be awful. It'd just be walking around like this all the time. That'd be it. We wouldn't have that kind of movement that we would need from
quite limited.
Yeah.
Now, the evolutionists use this basic design of ball and socket, one bone here, another hinge type joint here, and two bones down here. That's a common combination that's found in a lot of different creatures, and they say, aha, that means one evolved from the other. But no, it doesn't. It just means, like any good engineering, you look at the need and you say, now what is going to work for this particular need? So in terms of a human arm, we need one bone here and one joint to orientate the whole limb.
Yeah.
And then we need something that has a little bit more stability. So we have a hinge joint, so that's a much tighter joint with a limited number of different types of movements. But at the same time, there's some really quite clever manipulation here, because we can rotate this bone over that one, and you can actually feel that in your own elbow. And so we have this little rotating joint as well as this hinge joint. Very clever piece of
just backtracking
engineering
a little bit, because this would introduce then a new term perhaps which we haven't mentioned before, which is sort of convergent evolution.
Yes.
So we're probably going to do a whole program. We were talking last night about doing a whole program on this.
Yes.
But in relation to flight, right? Because nobody claims that the flying creatures like the pterosaur that's above my head here evolved into birds, or vice versa. And nobody claims that either birds or pterosaurs evolved into bats. And so you've actually, according to the theory of evolution, have flight evolved at least 5 separate times. Insects, birds, reptiles, mammals as well, right? So you've got all this kind of so this is a term known as convergent evolution. Lots of examples, and like nobody claims that we evolved from frogs, but frogs have a fairly similar limb structure to what we do. So what does this term mean then, and what is it in relation of comparing evolution to creation?
Well, we can see that this is a useful design because it's fit for purpose. The same basic combination can be made fit for purpose for a frog or for a mammal and even for a bird. So what you're seeing actually is the mind of the creator, who's saying, we have this basic design and it can be used for different purposes. All it requires is some variation in the combination or the proportions and the strength. So it's actually a sign of intelligent, purposeful design rather than chance random evolution, because if it was completely chance and random, well, you wouldn't have those similarities.
And we made that point in the last episode as well about the relation between a lot of these and physical mechanics, right? Thinking about, I think we mentioned it in relation to the lungs, right, and the way that it works. Well, the fact that you have laws that govern how physical things behave and how physical things will react and interact between one thing and another. That again goes to there being a grand designer who put those laws in place in the first place. Because if you have a random chance universe where random things happen at random intervals, there'd be no base law, base structure for which to design a living being around. But we know that things will always interact in a certain way. We know that fluid and gas dynamics will always react in a certain way. So we shouldn't be surprised that when you create living things, which are also being governed by these laws, that many of the design features are similar because they're being governed by the same laws that dictate how stuff flows through systems and how things move and interact with each other and so on and so forth. So we really shouldn't be surprised, like you say, that there are common design patterns found throughout nature, even particularly with limbs and stuff, because limbs are there designed to give us strength and help with our movement and our propulsion. So it makes sense, really. It should all line up like that. But perhaps we should have a whole episode talking about convergent evolution and how it all sort of comes together. Great. And I know you were talking about this, right, about the twisting, because this has always fascinated me. We've actually got another limb bone here, hand bone here, and you've obviously, you've got the joint in the middle that bends nicely, right? That's your nice joint. But then you've got this manipulation as it twists, and I'd never really realised before. You can actually feel it, can't you, in your arms?
Yes, you
can
can.
see the layover. So we're dealing with it's a bit like this,
Yes, that's right.
and so that's kind of the two bones nice and flat open, and we turn it over like this, and now my bones are crossed inside.
Yes.
it's a bit bizarre to think about it.
Yes, it is, and this rotary joint is actually separate from this one here. So you've actually got a synovial, that's a lubricated surface around the edge of the top of the radius here.
Yeah, so the bone that's then attached up to here then, so that's always attached, but this bone here is able to rotate around. You can actually feel that kind of pulling as you move it. It's, that's amazing.
Yes.
And then now we dealt with this a lot more in the previous series, so go and check it out, because we specifically dealt with Nathan Lent, who claimed
that's
that
right.
these bones were about as useful as a bag of rocks thrown in there. But just remind us very quickly, Diane, about some of these bones and their usefulness.
Yes, these are called the carpal bones, and they can just slip and slide over one another. And as we said in the first episode, sometimes a whole lot of small movements can be added up to give you a particular bigger movement that you're aiming for, and so that spreads the load, and that's what these bones do here.
And it just means that you have both that flexibility as well as that power. Because if it was just one solid bone, yes, it would be a lot stronger, but you wouldn't have anywhere near the flexibility. If it was more bones or differently designed bones, then you would have perhaps more flexibility if there were more joints, but you would not have the power and the grip, and you'd be breaking your wrist all the time. So it's the right balance for between the two. Just remind me what this large knob here is, this bone, because I remember talking about this before, and you can kind of feel that in your wrist there.
Yes, you've got this little bone here and this one here, and we have to remember there are tendons from muscles up here in the forearm that come across here. So these act as guides for those tendons and attachment sites for the ligaments. So that this is a strong structure, but it enables the movement of the tendons that come across here and go down to your fingers to enable you to do all the clever things that we can do with our fingers.
Well, speaking of that, so that's something that we can do. We can do this, which is something that apes can't do. We have a lot of dexterity in our fingers and so just talk a little bit about that, about the flexibility as well as the strength of the fingers, because this is a designed hand and it's designed for a purpose, which is a different purpose to an ape's hand.
That's right. Yes. Well, one of the interesting thing is when you have your fingers stretched out like this, you can open and close them very easily. Now bend your fingers to a right angle. Now try and open it.
It's not happening. I can just about do that on there, but it's not going very far the rest of them.
That's right, because these little joints here are not true hinge joints or true ball and socket joints. They are a much more subtle combination that moves freely when the fingers are held out straight, so that you can open your hand wide, do all sorts of clever things, play the piano, type on a computer and things like that.
Yeah.
But if you want to pick something up, you want the fingers to close tightly. In fact, you can even close them so tightly that you can actually hold some liquid in them, right? And the joints just don't easily come apart. They're held together by the ligaments. So that's a way of...
So you've got that strength there when you're bringing it together and the dexterity when you're moving it apart. So it's actually a very clever design.
Yes, and if you talk to the people who are designing robots these days, think of how much computer-aided design and how much really clever engineering has to go into designing something that's not even half as good as this.
And of course, this is supposed to have just come about by random chance, just by mutations occasionally, creating something new, which we've never obviously seen, but supposedly over... Well, actually, you think about it, you say over millions of years, but we're supposed to have gone from an ape-like creature into human beings in approximately 2 to 2.5 million years. That's not a lot of time in the grand scheme of things. When you think that, dinosaurs are up to 200 million years old and a little bit old, and you think, oh, actually, that's a enormous amount of design just for random chance to produce. in just a couple of million years. It's impossible to get it in the first place, but it's even less likely given how little time that they actually give this volume of random chance, because the probability of this happening is pretty much close to nothing.
Well, that's right. Well, if it's truly random, you're just as likely to go backwards as
you are forwards, exactly. So we're never going to be getting anywhere. But yeah, brilliant piece of design then in the wrist. Certainly not a random jumble of bones, and a pretty decent design overall in the arm as well. But let's move on then, Diane, to some more. We've got some more bones and stuff. We've got some more limb bones. So what are we looking at here? What are these?
And this is a femur. This is a thigh bone. So that's the ball in the ball and socket joint that will fit into the to the hip. And and this is a much deeper socket here that you've got here. And so this is a joint that's designed for strength. Now this is where we really know that these had to be designed, because you may have heard of people having hip replacements, right, and knee replacements. Now hip replacements were actually easier in terms of the design of the joint than the knees, because this is a simple ball and socket, and that's how it works. And it's designed, again, to orientate the whole limb. And it's important that it is a ball and socket, because if we go over to here, as well as for each step you take, of course, you have to move it forward. But if you're going to walk around any corners, it has to be rotated inwards or outwards. And it also has to be able to come apart and go back into the middle in order to walk on uneven ground.
Yes. Yeah.
So it is a very strong joint, but it also has a lot of flexibility, or a number of ranges of movements to enable us to walk on uneven ground and to go around corners.
It often seems to be coming into getting this balance between flexibility, dexterity, the ability to be able to manipulate itself into moving, like you say, over uneven ground, but also providing strength. Because if you go too far one way or the other, you're not going to get that balance. If you make the strength amped up so it's like a solid piece of steel, then you're just going to be walking around all the time. But if you're a bit too flexible, you're never going to get the strength and will constantly be collapsing and breaking down. So it's about getting this balance. And I think that in itself, finding that right balance, and the fact that we are able to get up and walk is amazing evidence that this has been brilliantly designed.
Yes. And in fact, going back to that point about us wobbling around, it is just as well that we don't have ball and socket joints in our knees. Can you imagine that?
It's like a Monty Python sketch.
Yes, it certainly would. But the knee is not actually a simple hinge joint. Now, we think that it might just, it just works like that. But in fact, this is the largest and most complicated joint in the body, and it's been a real challenge to make knee replacements that really work well. Now, we have got to the stage now where for knee replacements, using artificial intelligence and computer-aided design, we can actually make the prosthesis, that's the artificial surface that is going to be replaced, tailor-made for each patient.
Right,
That's
so it's not just
really brilliant.
It's a standard bung it all in.
Yes,
it's got to be tailor-made to them.
They're tailor-made, but that took a lot of clever engineering and computer-aided design to do that, so they can make that for each person, because basically, yes, you do get that hinge sort of movement, but when you stand up and completely upright, in the last few degrees of that movement, there is a subtle twist, and that literally locks in the knee so that you don't need to use muscles in order just to stand up straight. Once it's like that, it's stabilized, because that line of gravity we talked about in the last episode actually is just in front of the pivot point for that joint. So gravity plus this tightening or this locking will keep that joint stable as long as you're standing still, so that you don't have to be constantly contracting muscles merely to stand up straight. So again, human beings are designed to be vertical.
Yeah, Yeah, and it's that again that evidence of design that fits in so brilliantly with everything that we see working together. Like you say, it's the knee joint needs to be correct if the leg is going to work. The hip joint needs to be correct if the whole bottom torso is going to work. And if you don't have a perfectly designed spine to keep you upright, you're just going to be collapsing about all over the place. So it goes back to everything needs to be working at the same time.
Yes.
You can't have a perfectly developed spine but a broken pair of legs because you're never going to walk. That's why we have patients, right? Unfortunately, it's one of the realities of living in the sin-cursed world that we do. We do have people born with deformities who do have twisted spines, who do have deformed legs, who aren't properly connected to their muscles and ligaments, and it causes big problems. And to try and say that, well, this could happen step by step, we never see that. What we do see is, again, as you've pointed out, this good to bad to worse, this breakdown of biology where you now do get problems, you now do get pain, you now do get these issues. But that's not to say that it's because it's bad design, it's because we live in a fallen world where this biology is breaking down. But the fact that we have all of this working together, it really is an amazing testament to the incredible design of Jesus Christ, because it is Jesus Christ who's the creator, isn't he?
Yes, indeed. And we can see the original good design. And the other thing, of course, is with apes and monkeys, their legs never straighten out completely like that.
So even when
there's always a curve, and these are always bent, the hip and the knee, so that even when they do try and walk upright, it's not the stable sort of well-balanced upright walking that we've got with our legs completely underneath our bodies.
Yeah, so it's again a good distinction between us and apes, and to try and get to that point is just impossible by itself. Yes. Random chance. Well, what about then, Diane? So if we look at we've got our leg, you can see it down with Ezekiel as well, but we've got this bit now. It's just floating in the middle there, right? Well, obviously the piece of metal wouldn't be there. So this little bone here is just floating in the middle, and this is your kneecap, and you can do the funny thing, can't you? Where you stand back a little bit. If your leg's nice and straight, you can kind of wobble that bit, and it moves back and forth a bit unnervingly. So,
well,
what's this for?
The reason for that is that this bone is completely embedded in a tendon. Right. Now, you've heard of quadriceps femoris, this big muscle on the front of your spine, the quads. The athletes talk about. Yes, they do their quad stretches. Right. Yes. So that is a huge mass of muscle where 4 muscle parts come together into a big thick tendon, which then attaches to the front of the shin bone here or to the tibia. And this bone is actually completely embedded in that tendon. So that's why when you have a skeleton like this, where you have no bones, where you have no ligaments rather, and no muscles, the patella or the kneecaps sort of left floating there, but it's not floating. It's actually embedded in a tendon.
Now, obviously, so these aren't from the same individual, so there's a slight, fitting problem. But just for illustrative purposes, this will then sort of sit in like
sit
this,
on top of that,
and this patella then sits pretty much straight over the joint, straight over that hinge.
That's right.
Is that what the patella is? It there to protect the hinge?
It's for protection.
And obviously that produces then your knee, the actual thing that you'd think of as your knee when you bend down to kneel on it. It's this bit here.
Yes, so that's what you can feel at the front of your knee.
It as it goes. So you're protecting not only the ligament that it's embedded in, but also all the joint as well.
Yes, so you've got one of those smooth surfaces again, so you've got one of those lubricated surfaces.
So that's basically whenever you find the sort of really smooth surfaces, curved surfaces you're dealing with, and that obviously would fit onto this part as well.
Yes, and that will be covered with a layer of cartilage, and then there will be fluid in the joint. Not a lot, but just enough to give it a nice slippery surface so it rolls over one another.
Yeah, and that's the same on the back of the patella as well, with that surface there?
Yes, that smooth surface there as well.
There we go.
Yes.
Perfect. So going then slightly further down the bone, we've got these 2 bones now, which we can also see here fits together as well, and we can see it on Ezekiel as well. So what are these bones here?
Yes, so tibia and fibula. And there is a fibrous layer that connects these, and these flat surfaces here, or flattish surfaces, act as the base for muscles. So all the muscles that work your ankle and go down into your toes are attached up here. So again, bones are important as the anchor points for muscles and tendons. And this also acts as an extra strut at the side here. And then we have another hinge joint. So the ankle joint is actually more like a true hinge joint than the knee. And then again, we have another collection of small bones with the same principle as in the leg, but they are bigger. And that gives you a whole lot of small movements that add up, give this a bit of flexibility, but it is very strong. Right? And notice how it's not flat, it's an arch. And that is another distinctive feature between a human foot and an ape foot. An ape has a flat foot. We have an arched foot, and that's actually built into the structure. Now it's reinforced because there are ligaments and tendons that will also hold it into that shape, but it's actually built into the shape of the bones.
Now, if I remember correctly from our last series, and by the way, go and check out series 1 of Around the Museum with Joe and Diane, because we dealt a whole episode specifically on limb bones, wrists, and ankles. But if I remember correctly, not only do we have an arch this way, it's arched like that, but it's also arched this way as well, from side to side. So it's kind of like almost this kind of like a proper arch, like a curve both way. And again, that's to create that flexibility and that power. But then we've got this whopping great big bone at the back here as well.
Yes, that's right, which rejoices in the name of calcaneus, but heel bone will do.
And that's just solid, just to provide, because that's where most of your weight is going to be for most of the time, is going to be sitting on that. On your heels.
When you're standing up, this is actually fairly well distributed. The weight comes down here and about half goes back and half goes forward, so that holds your feet firmly on the ground, right? Nicely balanced, but then as soon as you pick it up, you've got that spring in your step that you get for walking.
So all of this design we've looked at, it just shouts the praises of our Creator.
Indeed it does.
It's not a bad design, but we do have bad bones, we do have bad joints, but that's not because they were designed that way, it's because we live in a fallen and a broken world where we have gone from good to bad to worse. And for those who do believe in Jesus Christ as their Lord and Saviour, there is a glory that is coming where there won't be
we can look forward to having new bodies in the new heavens and new earth, and it specifically says there'll be no pain and suffering. So all of you who have suffered from arthritis through your life, where your bones and joints are suffering from living a long, hard life, or sometimes a short, hard life, or some sort of inflammatory disease which has prematurely caused them to suffer, that will all be gone. And aren't we grateful that Jesus came to earth and lived in an earthly body? And when I think of the amount of walking that they did in New Testament times, I'm sure Jesus suffered from sore feet, so he really did take on our sorrows and our pains. But then he died and rose again in order that we might look forward to that new body in the new heavens and new earth.
Amen, amen. And be sure to join us next time for Around the Museum with Joe and Diane, and check out creationresearch.net, where you can find out more evidence of the wonderful world that we live in and God's creation. Catch you next time. Why not visit one of the many creation research museums around the globe? Find out more at creationresearch.net. Check out Creation Research Live, our all-new streaming service for creation research, with thousands of free resources and access to all of Creation Research's premium documentaries, debates and presentations through a low-cost monthly subscription. Find out more at creationresearch.live. Be sure to join us for Creation Conversations, a weekly live broadcast with the whole Creation Research team, dealing with different topics from creation, evolution and the Bible.